The insult isn't the problem. Your interpretation is. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in a crowded room, perhaps at a workplace meeting or a social gathering, and someone levels a sharp, stinging insult directly at your intelligence or your character. In a fraction of a second, your autonomic nervous system hijacks your body. Your heart rate spikes, your face flushes hot, and your brain screams for a snappy comeback, desperately searching for a way to hurt them just as much as they tried to hurt you. You feel an overwhelming, almost primal urge to defend your pride and strike back immediately. Because modern society has relentlessly conditioned us to believe that letting an insult slide is a pathetic sign of weakness and that you must always fight loudly for your dignity. But right there, in that exact split second of surging adrenaline, you are actually standing at a profound psychological crossroads. And 99% of people take the wrong path. One route leads to a reactive, ego-driven shouting match where you both look incredibly small, trapped in a chaotic exchange that drains your energy and instantly costs you the respect of everyone watching. The other path, the ancient and closely guarded path of the Stoics, leads to a level of quiet, unshakable dominance so absolute that the person who insulted you ends up feeling like they have just thrown a tiny pebble at a massive steel mountain. Most people fall blindly into the first trap. They believe they must fight, explain, or desperately justify their existence, completely unaware of the devastating truth that Epictetus and the great Stoic philosophers understood over 2,000 years ago. The moment you lose your temper and react with anger, you have voluntarily handed the leash of your own mind over to your enemy. You are no longer the master of your own soul. You are nothing but a puppet dancing to the erratic tune of their disrespect. When someone hurls an insult at you, they are essentially just shouting into the wind, hoping you will be foolish enough to catch that wind and let it knock you entirely off balance. They want to steal your calm, your confidence, and your inner peace, manipulating you with their toxic words because they are secretly suffering from their own deep insecurities and internal chaos. The trap is brilliantly deceptive because the harder you try to actively defend your intelligence or your worth, the more power you accidentally surrender to the person attacking you. You validate their disrespect by treating it as if it holds actual, objective weight in the real world. Epictetus, a man who endured life as a slave and intimately knew the agonizing sting of degradation, discovered a revolutionary cognitive secret that flips this power dynamic entirely on its head. He realized that true strength is never loud, reactive, or highly emotional. True power is the disciplined ability to look at an insult, recognize it as nothing more than meaningless sound waves and someone else's flawed opinion, and utterly refuse to grant it entry into the fortified walls of your mind. If you want to maintain your absolute authority in any hostile situation, you do not need a sharper tongue or a viral clapback. You need a fundamental psychological shift that makes you completely untouchable, transforming their toxic aggression into a mirror that exposes their own weakness while preserving your unbroken peace. Epictetus was not born into wealth or privilege. He was born a slave in the brutal world of ancient Rome, enduring a life where physical abuse and relentless verbal degradation were everyday realities. If anyone had the right to feel victimized or deeply offended by the cruelty of others, it was him. Yet, out of that harsh environment, he forged a mental framework so incredibly resilient that even the most powerful men in the Roman Empire eventually looked to him for guidance. His ultimate secret to handling disrespect was rooted in one radical cognitive shift. He recognized that when someone insults you, you must break the event down to its bare, physical reality. When a person across the room calls you a failure or mocks your life choices, what is actually happening? They are exhaling air from their lungs, vibrating their vocal cords, and sending invisible sound waves across the space between you. Those sound waves enter your ear canal. That is the absolute extent of their power. The sound wave itself cannot break your bones. It cannot drain your bank account, and it certainly cannot alter your fundamental worth as a human being. The pain you feel does not come from the word itself. It comes entirely from the story you instantly tell yourself about that word. Epictetus brilliantly pointed out that it is not the person who abuses you that causes you pain, but your own internal judgment that their words are somehow harmful. You are the one who takes their meaningless noise and voluntarily weaponizes it against your own self-esteem. When you understand this, everything changes. You begin to see that an insult is never a statement of objective fact. It is nothing more than a highly subjective opinion, colored by the speaker's own biases, insecurities, and bad days. If a 5-year-old child calls you a fool because you refuse to let them eat candy for breakfast, you do not feel a surge of rage. You do not feel the need to defend your intellect. You simply brush it off because you know the child lacks understanding. The Stoic perspective asks you to apply this exact same logic to the adults in your life who try to tear you down. Anyone who is driven by malice, jealousy, or a need to belittle others is emotionally and intellectually stunted. Their toxic words are not a reflection of your character. They are a glaring confession of their own internal chaos. They are desperate for a reaction because provoking you is the only way they can feel a fleeting sense of power. When you internalize the truth that their insults are just empty sound waves and their harsh judgments are just flawed opinions, you build an impenetrable shield around your mind. You no longer have to waste a single ounce of your precious energy trying to control what comes out of their mouths, because you have achieved total mastery over what you allow into your soul. Once you fully accept that an insult is just meaningless sound waves shaped by another person's flawed opinion, you unlock the next level of Stoic mastery, which is understanding the profound psychological concept of the false mirror. Think deeply about the type of person who goes out of their way to belittle your work, mock your achievements, or question your intelligence. A truly happy, fulfilled, and secure human being does not wake up in the morning with a burning desire to tear other people down. The urge to insult someone is always a symptom of an internal deficiency. When a coworker makes a toxic comment during a team meeting, or a stranger leaves a hateful remark on your profile, they are holding up a mirror, but they are absolutely not showing you your reflection. They are broadcasting their own secret fears, their deep jealousy, and their emotional instability to the entire world. They are frantically projecting their own internal chaos onto you because they do not have the strength to handle the heavy weight of it themselves. 99% of people completely miss this hidden dynamic. When they are insulted, their fragile ego immediately steps in and screams that they must aggressively defend themselves, that they must correct the record and prove the attacker wrong right then and there. But the trained Stoic realizes that there is absolutely nothing to defend, because you were never the actual target in the first place. You just happen to be the convenient screen onto which they projected their own misery. Imagine someone throwing a handful of mud at a towering fortress wall built of solid stone. The stone wall does not feel humiliated. The wall does not shrink in shame, and the wall certainly does not try to throw the mud back. The mud simply dries and falls off, and the person who threw it is left standing there with dirty hands, looking entirely foolish and exhausted. This is exactly how you must begin to view personal attacks. When you consciously detach your ego from their toxic words, you instantly strip the attacker of their only weapon. They desperately want you to internalize their poison so they can feel a fleeting, pathetic sense of power and superiority over you. But by utterly refusing to take their words personally, you leave them completely alone with their own bitterness. You begin to see them not as a powerful enemy who needs to be fiercely fought, but as an emotionally ill-equipped individual who is simply confessing their own weakness out loud. It takes a massive amount of mental discipline to reach this unshakable state of detachment, because modern society has incorrectly wired us to take absolutely everything personally. We are constantly taught that our personal reputation is incredibly fragile and must be violently protected at all times against every minor slight. But the ancient philosophers understood that your true value is forged exclusively in the fire of your own character and your own actions, never in the fleeting and unreliable opinions of chaotic people. By stepping away from the false mirror, you stop reacting to illusions. You stop participating in a destructive game that was completely rigged against you from the very start. Instead, you remain deeply anchored in your own reality, completely unbothered by the external noise around you, and you preserve all of your valuable mental energy to build your own remarkable life. So, how do you actually apply this profound detachment when you are standing right in the middle of a heated confrontation? The ancient Stoics developed specific, highly effective strategies to neutralize toxic behavior in real time. And the first of these is perhaps the most devastating weapon you can ever wield. We call it the tactical silence. When someone hurls a verbal dart at you, your immediate biological instinct is to fill the dead air with a rapid defense. Your brain urges you to speak quickly, to prove them wrong, to justify your actions, or to return fire with a sharper insult. But you must train yourself to do the exact opposite. When the insult lands, do absolutely nothing. Stop. Take a slow, deep breath, and mentally count to 3. As you count, look the person directly in their eyes with an entirely calm, neutral, and unbothered expression. Do not cross your arms, do not roll your eyes, and do not scowl. Simply observe them as if you are studying a fascinating but harmless and confusing phenomenon. This deliberate, heavy silence is the most incredibly uncomfortable experience you can inflict upon an aggressor. When people insult you, they are throwing out bait, desperately expecting you to bite so they can drag you into their chaotic emotional world. By not reacting immediately, you are completely ignoring the bait. You are essentially asking them, without uttering a single syllable. If that was truly the best they could do, this invisible psychological shift instantly transfers the entire weight of the pressure from your shoulders directly back onto theirs. They were anticipating a loud reaction and a heated argument. But by giving them absolute nothingness, you leave their toxic words hanging awkwardly in the empty space of the room, stripping away all of their intended impact. The silence quickly begins to suffocate them. It makes them look incredibly foolish to anyone else who might be watching, exposing their emotional outburst for exactly what it is, which is a complete and total lack of self-control. Most people completely misunderstand the nature of silence in these hostile situations. They think that staying quiet means you are weak, that you have nothing clever to say, or that you are passively submitting to the person attacking you. But tactical silence is not a cold shoulder given out of childish petulance, nor is it a cowardly retreat from the battlefield. It is a moment of profound internal assessment and immense psychological dominance. During those 3 seconds of quiet observation, you are actively maintaining the impenetrable walls of your mental fortress. You are giving your rational mind the necessary time to catch up with your autonomic nervous system, ensuring that when you finally do choose to speak or act, you do so from a position of unshakable authority rather than defensive panic. You demonstrate to everyone in the vicinity that you are the most powerful person in the room, because you are the only one whose peace of mind cannot be disturbed by mere sound waves. You have not just deflected their attack, you have effortlessly and entirely disarmed them. Once you have mastered the devastating power of the tactical silence, you are perfectly positioned to deploy the second advanced Stoic strategy, a method that operates entirely on the principles of psychological judo. Think about the physical mechanics of an argument. When a person throws a verbal punch at you, they are generating a massive amount of aggressive momentum. They fully expect you to block it, to fiercely defend your pride, or to push back with equal force. Modern society tells you that you must aggressively correct the record and prove the attacker wrong. But in the martial art of judo, you never meet force with blunt force. Instead, you grab hold of your opponent's momentum and use their own weight to throw them completely off balance. You can apply this exact same dynamic to verbal warfare. When an antagonist desperately wants you to build a defensive wall, you must give them absolutely nothing to push against. Imagine a hostile coworker or a toxic relative looking you right in the eye and telling you that you are entirely incompetent or that your ideas are completely foolish. Do not let your heart rate spike, and do not launch into a passionate defense of your intellect. Instead, look at them with a calm, almost clinical curiosity and deliver a response like, "Interesting. Please tell me more," or simply offer a mild, unbothered concession by saying, "You might be right." The psychological impact of this response is absolutely staggering. The person who insulted you was armed and completely prepared for a heated battle. They craved your anger and your frantic justification because your emotional reaction is the only thing that validates their false sense of superiority. By refusing to resist, you instantly short-circuit their entire toxic narrative. You take their aggressive energy and smoothly reflect it right back onto them. Because there is no defensive wall for them to crash into, they stumble forward into empty space. Suddenly, the spotlight is entirely on them, and they are awkwardly forced to explain their hostile outburst while you stand there looking perfectly reasonable and deeply in control. You are communicating, without uttering a single arrogant syllable, that their subjective opinion holds so little weight in your actual reality that it is not even worth the calories required to fight it. Fire cannot possibly burn without a steady supply of oxygen, and a personal insult absolutely cannot survive without your emotional resistance. When you use psychological judo, you step entirely out of the victim role and transform into the untouchable observer. You let their poison evaporate in the air, proving to everyone watching that true intellectual dominance is never about who can shout the loudest or who can deliver the cruelest comeback, but about who has the supreme discipline to remain totally unaffected by the chaotic noise around them. While psychological judo is incredibly effective for disarming sudden insults, there are times when you will face an antagonist who is stubbornly toxic, someone who refuses to let go and relentlessly continues their aggressive attack. When a person is deeply committed to dragging you down into their emotional chaos, you must deploy the third and most definitive Stoic strategy, which is establishing the ultimate boundary. In our modern culture, we are constantly told that walking away from a heated conflict is a glaring sign of cowardice, that you must aggressively stand your ground, call the other person out, and fight back loudly to defend your honor. But the ancient Stoic philosophers understood a profound psychological truth that completely dismantles this modern myth. They realized that engaging with absolute irrationality is never a victory, and that true strength is knowing exactly when a battle is simply no longer worth your precious mental energy. When you find yourself trapped in an interaction with someone who is deliberately disrespectful, someone who constantly talks over you, mocks your decisions, or tries to manipulate your reality, you must recognize that arguing with them is entirely futile. Your rational points will only be ignored, twisted, or weaponized against you. This is the exact moment you must utilize the ultimate boundary. You stop, look the aggressor directly in the eyes with absolute calm, and tell them firmly, "This conversation is no longer productive." Alternatively, you can establish the limit by saying, "Let us talk when you are ready to be respectful." By delivering these precise words, you are not surrendering or running away. You are unilaterally ending the game on your own terms. You are sending a clear, devastating message to the room that you control your own time and your own peace of mind, and that you absolutely refuse to participate in a chaotic circus just for their amusement. Another incredibly powerful variation of this boundary is reserved for those entitled individuals who demand your submission simply because of their age, their professional title, or their inflated ego. When they try to force your compliance and demand your respect, you calmly remind them that respect is earned, not demanded. This phrase is a silent but incredibly heavy assertion of your intrinsic self-worth. It immediately exposes the reality that their aggressive demands for respect are actually just loud confessions of their deep-seated insecurities. When you establish these firm boundaries and then physically or emotionally remove yourself from the toxic situation, you completely short-circuit their desperate need for drama. They needed you to fight back so they could feel powerful and validated. But you leave them standing there awkwardly, talking to empty air, with their immaturity fully exposed to the entire world. Walking away in this manner is the ultimate display of psychological dominance, because it proves that you are so fiercely protective of your inner fortress that you will not waste a single ounce of your energy on an unworthy opponent. Even after you have masterfully established a firm boundary and walked away from a highly toxic individual, you might occasionally find that a lingering sense of anger or a burning desire for revenge still echoes in the back of your mind. Modern society relentlessly conditions us to hold on to grudges, convincing us that forgiving an insult is a sign of weakness and that we must always remain fiercely bitter to protect our pride. But to achieve ultimate Stoic mastery, you must take one final, profoundly liberating step. You must completely transform your residual anger into a state of radical empathy. Think deeply about the reality of human behavior for a moment. A truly happy, well-adjusted, and highly fulfilled human being simply does not spend their precious time and energy desperately trying to tear other people down. They do not go out of their way to drop passive-aggressive comments in a corporate boardroom, and they do not hide behind an anonymous keyboard to leave hateful, venomous messages on the internet. When a person hurls a vicious insult at you, they are essentially handing you a glaring, undeniable symptom of their own deep psychological wound. They are in immense emotional pain, and their aggressive behavior is nothing more than a desperately flawed mechanism for coping with their own massive insecurities, their intense jealousy, or their profound feeling of powerlessness in the world. The ancient philosophers clearly recognized that an individual who is entirely governed by malice is essentially operating like an emotionally stunted child. If a 3-year-old toddler yells at you and calls you a terrible name because they are overtired and cranky, your heart rate does not spike. You do not feel a burning rage, and you certainly do not feel deeply offended. You simply observe their chaotic outburst with a calm, quiet sense of pity because you recognize that they entirely lack the mental tools required to handle their own turbulent emotions. The Stoic perspective asks you to apply this exact same psychological framework to the fully grown adults in your life who unpredictably lash out at you. When you look at an attacker not as a formidable villain who needs to be aggressively defeated in verbal battle, but as a deeply flawed individual who is emotionally ill-equipped and mentally suffering, your entire internal state shifts immediately. It is virtually impossible to be genuinely offended by someone when you actually feel sorry for them. This radical empathy is absolutely not about letting them off the hook, condoning their terrible actions, or validating their toxic behavior. Instead, it is the ultimate psychological strategy for protecting your own mental fortress. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca once noted, to be angry is essentially to revenge the faults of others directly upon ourselves. If you stubbornly hold on to resentment and anger, you are voluntarily carrying their heavy, filthy baggage around with you everywhere you go. You are actively letting their dark cloud block your sunlight long after they have physically left the room. But when you actively choose to pity their complete lack of self-control, you neutralize the poison of their insult instantly and permanently. You profoundly recognize that they are already punishing themselves every single day simply by having to live inside such a bitter, chaotic, and unhappy mind. By deploying radical empathy, you do not just merely survive the insult, you completely and utterly transcend it. You effortlessly elevate yourself far above the mud and the noise, remaining perfectly anchored in your own quiet authority. You prove to yourself and the entire world that your peace of mind is absolutely untouchable, and that you refuse to let another person's miserable illness infect your healthy, heavily fortified soul. When you have successfully shifted your mindset from burning anger to radical empathy, you arrive at the most profound and elevated stage of the Stoic framework, which the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius beautifully described as the revenge of excellence. He wrote in his personal journal that the absolute best revenge you can ever take upon an antagonist is simply to be unlike the person who performed the injury. Think about what happens when you lower your own standards to fight back in the mud. The very moment you trade one bitter insult for another, you have essentially become the exact twin of your attacker. You have completely validated their toxic behavior by mirroring it, and you have sacrificed your own hard-earned dignity just to score a cheap verbal point. But the ancient Stoic philosophers approached hostility with a completely different mindset. They viewed every single insult, every harsh criticism, and every moment of disrespect not as an agonizing setback, but as incredibly valuable data. They saw these hostile moments as a rigorous training ground to test the strength of their own character. The great philosopher Epictetus used to ask his students what the legendary hero Heracles would have been if he had never faced the terrifying lion or the deadly hydra or the brutal men of his time. If Heracles had only experienced a life of perfect comfort and ease, he would have just wrapped himself up in a blanket and slept his entire life away. He needed those formidable monsters and those extreme difficulties to push against in order to awaken his true strength and display his magnificent power to the world. You must learn to view the toxic and insulting people in your own life through this exact same lens. They are the metaphorical lions and hydras of your modern existence. When they hurl their disrespect at your fortress, they are unknowingly doing you a massive favor. They are providing you with the perfect, high-pressure environment to test your psychological sinews, your patience, and your self-control. Instead of letting their chaotic words drag you down into a miserable shouting match, you take their aggressive energy and you channel it directly into your own personal growth. You use their negativity as the heavy weight you lift to build your mental muscles. Every time you choose absolute calmness over a frantic reaction, every time you choose unwavering politeness over a sarcastic comeback, and every time you choose to remain securely anchored in your own values while they are spiraling out of control, you are executing the ultimate form of dominance. You do not need to humiliate them publicly or crush them with a sharper tongue. Your revenge is completely silent and utterly devastating. You simply continue to operate at a level of excellence, rationality, and peace that they cannot even begin to comprehend, leaving them trapped in their own miserable cycle of anger while you effortlessly rise above the noise and continue building your remarkable life. When you have successfully utilized all these strategies, you finally step into the realm of true authority. Modern society has relentlessly conditioned us to believe that the most powerful person in any room is the one who speaks the loudest, the one who aggressively demands the most attention, or the one who can deliver the most devastating and viral comeback to a sudden insult. But the ancient philosophers deeply understood that this is nothing but an incredibly fragile illusion of power. True authority is never highly reactive, and it is never driven by wild emotion. True authority is not the ability to loudly crush your enemies in a bitter shouting match. It is the breathtaking ability to remain entirely indifferent to their desperate attempts to crush you. When a toxic person insults you, they are essentially handing you a poorly written script and demanding that you play a specific, degrading role in their own chaotic emotional drama. They desperately want you to play the angry victim or the frantically defensive opponent. But you must remember that you are the sole author of your own life, and you have the absolute psychological power to reject their script entirely. As the great Stoics profoundly understood, the moment you realize that you have absolute power over your own mind and not over outside events, you instantly discover an unshakable strength that no insult can ever penetrate. You begin to fully understand that you do not need to argue with chaos, you simply need to rise above it. Every single time you face disrespect and deliberately choose tactical silence over angry words, Every time you choose radical empathy over bitter revenge, and every time you establish a firm boundary and walk away, you are actively fortifying your mental walls. You become the most powerful person in the room precisely because your peace of mind is no longer held hostage by the unpredictable opinions of chaotic people. You have fundamentally transformed the way you interact with the world, turning external negativity into the very fuel that drives your own internal excellence. The next time someone attempts to disrupt your peace, remember the incredible power that lies within your own disciplined response. Do not give them your valuable energy. Do not validate their deep insecurities, and do not step down into the mud to fight a messy battle that was never yours to fight. Remain securely anchored in your own reality. Maintain your quiet dominance, and watch as their toxic words simply evaporate into the empty air around you. True power is never about having the loudest voice. It is about cultivating a mind so deeply rooted in Stoic wisdom that no external noise can disturb your peace. When you master your own reactions, you disarm every insult and transform disrespect into an unshakable advantage. If this philosophy has shifted your perspective and provided you with the mental tools to build an impenetrable fortress around your mind, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join our community of individuals dedicated to mastering themselves. Leave a comment below sharing a moment when you successfully chose calm over chaos, and let us continue to build this library of unshakable poise together. Remember, the strongest person in the room is never the loudest. The strongest person is the one who remains entirely calm, fiercely disciplined, and absolutely untouchable. Protect your peace, maintain your excellence, and I will see you in the next video.